Cabinet has approved the extension of the national state of disaster to October the 15th, 2020, yet to be gazetted by COCTA Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. This is to continue giving effect to the regulations that remain relevant to manage the spread of COVID-19 infections. The extension of South Africa's state of disaster comes after President Cyril Ramaphosa said that the National Coronavirus Command Council is evaluating a number of proposals around the further easing of lockdown restrictions. Professor Alex van den Heever, Chair in Social Security at Wits University, joins us to explore what this could mean for the country at large. Prof, thank you for your time and thank you for joining us on Weekend Dawn. So another extension, does this mean that we will remain in level 2 in your opinion?
I don't think so. I think we've seen a significant decline, a sort of a negative trajectory in the epidemic in most provinces in the last sort of 30 days or so. Certainly we saw a turning point in around about mid to late July. So at this point, the question is really what residual preventive measures we require in place. And we had sort of two variants. We had one in which we shut down parts of the economy, and we had others in which involved the rules about mask wearing and the regulation of sort of social spaces. So I think that we should be moving toward the latter and away from the former completely. And I think we're in a position where we are now better able to manage the epidemic without sort of draconian action. So I expect that we will move to a further opening of the remaining closed parts of the economy.
And do you think that if it opens as soon as the 15th of October, we won't go back into a situation like other countries who have experienced second waves or even gone back to a hard lockdown?
So it depends very much on the extent to which the sort of particular communities have developed some herd immunity. So a number of seroprevalence studies are showing that in the hotspot areas that there were very high levels of infection, and that this has potentially generated a degree of herd immunity in those communities. So, but not all communities have that herd immunity, and we don't really have a clear indication of infection levels outside of the major hotspots. So in any area which didn't experience a major sort of outbreak, where effectively the disease was prevented from transmitting to much of the community, they remain at risk. So if we fail to properly regulate key social spaces that are prone to super spreading events, then we could see some resurgence. I doubt any resurgence will be equivalent to what we've had in the main part of this outbreak. But it's potentially very possible if we let our guard down. But what we will have to do going forward is to recognize that we should keep our non-pharmaceutical interventions in place for quite some time until we have a successful vaccine and not relax and suddenly go into areas without masks, without adequate social distancing, and into poorly ventilated areas, because we will probably see a rise in infections.
I'm looking at the Coronavirus Command Council, obviously always evaluating the proposals that are always probably coming in on how to work out the restrictions of level 2 or soon to be level 1 lockdown. And one thing that definitely pops out for me is the gatherings at churches. There's been a proposal there of church congregations trying to get at least 50% of attendees. Do you think this is something that they'd be looking at as well in level 1 lockdown?
Well, I'd hope not. I think that one of our key risks remains sort of gatherings of people, because that's where a super spreading event can occur. We can't control the quality of the ventilation in every one of these spaces. So we know that there's a strong airborne component to the virus and spread, and therefore we need to make sure that those spaces remain effectively protected. So what you're seeing in some parts of Europe is where they've relaxed those kinds of rules. They've seen a resurgence because people go back and behave as they would have done in March or February. And immediately there's a resurgence. But it's not about reopening the economy. It's about whether or not these high-risk gatherings can occur. So I would say that we should continue to be very cautious about how the collective spaces are regulated. But I think that areas such as we're in a position to open our borders, for instance, and to allow international travel. I don't think that those pose, and I think the evidence is fairly clear that those don't pose a risk to super spreading within our context. We already have a community-based outbreak, so that's not going to make much of a difference. What is going to make a difference is how we regulate our high-risk spaces generally, and we will have to continue to regulate them for quite some time.
Professor, on social media alone, we've seen pockets and images of large gatherings, either being in public areas, etc., with people now being allowed to also consume alcohol. Won't that also pose a risk and give the chance or the possibility that we might go back to a harder lockdown? And also, just a two-pronged question there, do you think police are doing enough to make sure that these illegal gatherings don't go beyond the amount of 50 people, or they don't go beyond the 10 o'clock restaurant trading hours?
Yeah, so I think that where the gatherings are occurring indoors, there's a different level of risk to when gatherings occur outdoors. So a large part of the transmission or the risk of a sort of super spreading event occurs in a poorly ventilated enclosed space. So there is an issue about how people are able to act outdoors with reasonable sort of protocols in place. But indoors, there should be mask wearing and there should be a limited number of people. In terms of when people are, whether the police are doing their job, I mean, that has been an issue all the way through, whether or not the enforcement of regulations has been proportionate, appropriate, and sensitive. I don't think it has always been complete, and I don't think that we have relied on voluntary compliance through trust more than having somebody with the jackboot come and arrive at your door. I think that we've lost a lot of trust during this process because of the inconsistent behavior of police and the security forces. And that, I think, is not the way to necessarily regulate a pandemic. You've got to build the trust of society. And if people are sort of willfully disobeying coherent and logical rules, then you have to question whether or not you've lost the trust and try and rebuild that rather than to try and enforce through rules. But I think that where it's unclear on how much of a risk is posed by going late into nights. But I think that the longer people are in an enclosed setting, late and grouped together, the greater the chance that there will be some sort of super spreading event. So I think that really is where a lot of the technical advice and the scientific advice needs to focus on how we look and manage those spaces, because that's where the residual risk in this epidemic will continue, particularly outside of the hotspots that we've had to date.
I want to conclude by asking you about the economy. We're looking at this extension right up to the 15th of October. Is this a decision that you think prioritizes boosting the economy and building it up again? Because, I mean, we obviously know it took a knock over the past few months. And is this decision done in a way that could see us see a possible extension maybe in the near future as well? But all overall, will it include doing better for the economy?
Well, I'm certainly hoping that the extension is not about extending the closure of any part of the economy. As I said, a major economic issue that has to be addressed right now is the opening of our borders. We're facing a situation where one of our biggest industries in South Africa is going to incur continued substantial losses on inbound tourism if we don't create certainty immediately so that people can plan overseas trips to South Africa for the summer holidays. If we don't get that right in the next few days, people are going to go to Bali, they're going to go somewhere else. So even with the pandemic affecting people in different European countries, they're still traveling. So I think that as part of our rehabilitation, we have to open every single sector. We've got to manage this virus with an open economy. We have no other option. And the fiscal position of government is so dire that if we do not rebuild and reopen all parts of our economy, we will face a crippled fiscal position for probably 3 to 4 years. And therefore, we've got to end this and get our economy going as fast as possible. So everything needs to be focused on getting our economy moving. That doesn't mean that the vigilance on managing the epidemic goes away. It means that it's managed through non-pharmaceutical interventions, which should really have been our focus from day one.
All right, so Professor Alex van den Heever, we'll leave it right there. Thank you so much for your time. That's Professor Alex van den Heever. He's the chair in Social Security at Wits University. He's been chatting to us about government's announcement to extend the national state of disaster to the 15th of October 2020.